hustle when you have work, not when you don't have it. And I thought a lot about that. It's that, trying to figure out what's next, because, things aren't going to last forever. But also, you think about this. When you have a lot of work, you have a different energy about you. It's that hustle when you have work thing that helps you remember, for lack of a better expression, to remember your dignity. Because sometimes people, like in the interest of getting work, they will kind of shelve their dignity, and that doesn't necessarily bring you up in the minds of other people. Because if they don't have work for you, it doesn't matter how you present yourself. They don't have work for you. It's how they remember you.
Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock. If you like what you hear on the show, subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 newsletter at broadwaydrumming101.com. To continue producing the high-quality podcast you're listening to, publishing engaging newsletter content, and posting YouTube videos, we would appreciate any financial contributions you can make. At this time, we have no advertisers, and we'd like to keep it that way. Our staff is small but growing. We can only produce the show with listener contributions from people like you. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual subscriber at broadwaydrumming101.com. You can also contribute any amount you wish through PayPal at paypal.me/BroadwayDrumming101 or through Venmo at BroadwayDrumming101. Or help keep us caffeinated by buying us a cup of coffee or a week's worth at buymeacoffee.com/BD101. That's buymeacoffee.com/BD101. We appreciate any support you can give. Don't forget to subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page. You'll find more content that isn't featured on the podcast or on the Broadway Drumming 101 Instagram page. Make sure when you subscribe to the YouTube page, you click on the button to be notified when a new video is published. Be sure to visit our new shop at merchandise.broadwaydrumming101.com. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.
Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today in this glorious sunny day is Peter Saleh. He's a drummer and percussionist who lives in New York City and has done so much over the years, which I didn't know until I looked up his bio. I was like, my goodness, you've done so much, and we're going to delve deeper into everything. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And actually, I'm glad I give the impression that I live in New York City. I actually live in New Jersey. So I've fully accomplished that my mission of making it seem like I live in the city. Good.
Fooled again.
I might as well, for the amount of time I spend getting into the city. But yes,
so
city adjacent.
Yes, you're a city adjacent. Are you from New York City?
No, I moved around a little bit when I was a kid. I was born in Ohio, lived in Louisiana for a few years, moved to Jersey when I was in grade school. And except for a 2-year detour down to North Texas for grad school, I've been in Jersey essentially the whole time.
And what was it that made you say, you know what, look at that timpani right there. I want to play that.
Timpani, okay.
Or was that the thing
a minute later? I can tell you the exact, the thing that flipped the drum switch for me was, this will date me, the Van Halen 5150 concert video and Alex Van Halen on that.
Wow.
And I watched that. There was a concert video, Live Without a Net, and I watched that many, many, many times. The cool thing about that is, now a couple decades later, 3.5 decades, a lot of years later, it holds up. I actually still look at that and go, that was a worthy inspiration even now. I mean, some of that is, probably a little bias on my part, but that was the original thing was Alex Van Halen. That was it for me.
Alex Van Halen was your introduction and said, that's kind of what I want to do. Did you want to play in a rock band?
Yeah. I mean, that's what I did. Like right off the bat, I played in high school. I played with a few bands, and I was also in school band, jazz band, marching band, concert band. But then I also had my own thing. It was mainly like rock and metal bands and stuff like that, like learning how to do all that double bass stuff, like Vinnie Paul style with my feet. But that was when I was in high school. I did as much as I possibly could, and I got based off of advice from a very unlikely source, which was the guy I bought my first drum set off of. It was a used Ludwig, not a great instrument, but it was mine. And I coveted this thing for so long before I actually got it. But the guy I bought it from, he just gave me some casual information, which was just, don't limit yourself to one style of music. And at that point, I didn't have a private teacher. I didn't have anybody talking to me about drums. It was kind of like my thing. And I was a little self-conscious about talking to other people about my interests because I didn't know if, how far it was going to go yet. I took that as like, all right, that's worthwhile advice. And I didn't know why I shouldn't follow that advice. And I loved a lot of styles of music. So it seemed to be consistent with what I probably already would have done anyway. And it just kind of was an external confirmation of like, do a lot of stuff, do as much as you can because it's still playing.
Did you have long hair back then?
Longer.
And what was, I'm curious, what was the name of your rock band, or did you have several?
My first band has a typically humorous / cringeworthy name. My first band was called Mystery Meat. Right. And I was in that for about a year. And then I was in another band for a few years, including my brother was the bass player in that band called Blackened. We named ourselves after the Metallica song.
Oh, wow.
And those years, like, okay, so I said I was in the school band and whatnot. But with those bands, I was with some people who were, let's put it this way, some bad seeds. And so this is what gave me kind of, like there's examples in life you can follow. Like, I want to be like that person, but there's just as much, there are examples you go like, I don't want to be like that other person. And there were some decent musicians I played with, but like, man, these were some bad kids. Like, and it gave me like a calibration test of like, who I like, what type of music, what environment do I want to be in? I always liked the social aspect of music, but this was like, I don't want to get arrested, like that. Yeah. Like it was like in that turf sort of thing. I don't want to get too much more in. I mean, I could name names, but I'm not gonna.
No, we don't know what the statute of limitations is. So.
No, but I'll tell you what. My former lead guitarist was on the national news for trying to break somebody out of jail once.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and he got caught for the dumbest reason you can possibly imagine. It tickles me to no end that I just got out of that environment well ahead of that. Because otherwise I would have been like hanging out with him, still doing like, nightclub stuff. Thanks.
Well, you are safe in the pits.
Quite safe. Safe and shielded, respectable.
Yes, no one, we don't start fights down there. So now I'm afraid of you, man. I might see you somewhere.
Oh my Lord, no!
You gotta have like brass knuckles. What's up, Clayton? What?
Well, based off of the conversation we had before we started recording, I could teach you some street language as well.
See, there's a dark side to Peter here, so people don't know.
Yeah, I suppress. Yeah. Push it down, Clayton.
Oh man, so that's funny. Blackened.
Yeah.
And ladies and gentlemen, welcome, Mystery Meat. Well, I don't know
if that band was ever going to be introduced with the term "ladies and gentlemen." Don't think so.
You grew up in New Jersey. You're playing in different bands, and did you want to go to college after high school for music? And what was your plan?
I didn't have a heck of a lot of steering, externally. So it was my plan. Sorry, what? Huh? What now? Like when I was in high school, it was, like I was saying, like, I'm on my dad's side, I'm first generation. My dad has 2 masters and a PhD, but it's all like engineering stuff. And so I originally went to college pursuing a chemistry major. My first couple of years of school, I worked at a liquor store while I was like just taking care of core requirements at a community college. I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do academically, so I didn't want to waste money pursuing a major. I knew I wanted to go to college just because I didn't know what other path was going to be a good, at least next step for me. And so I went to, I was working, 20 hours a week or something like that. Being a student, I did drum corps for a few years, drum and bugle corps for 3 summers, actually. And during that time, I was thinking, okay, I'll transfer to Rutgers. I'll do a chemistry major, I guess. I had no real interest in it. And then when I got to Rutgers, I ended up finding out that I could take some music theory classes just as an elective. And while I was like either sleeping through or sleeping past my chem lectures, I was putting a lot of time into this one music theory class. And so I just realized, okay, I should probably just follow where my interests and my efforts were pointing at that point. And so I went in that direction and originally did a BA in music, which is a it's not a very intense degree on the surface value, but I turned it into something intense because at that point, the Rutgers percussion studio wasn't as developed as it became afterwards. And so I was able to get lessons with a really great teacher. And then I completed the BA and then auditioned for a BM. So I actually have 2 bachelor's degrees in music. And the second one is where I got serious in terms of like really trying to make a go of things.
Did you want to work in symphonies, theater? I
didn't know anything about theater back then. The people in the percussion studio, I mean, I'm friends with a number of them still. People drift apart. I graduated college 20 years ago. Almost 20 years ago. But the people I went to college with were pretty narrow, and they were very smart people, good musicians in their own right, but they were pretty narrowly interested in the only music was like West European classical art music, right? And so that was what I was around. So I was, I had put my drum set playing, my drumming aside when I went to go to college because I thought I got to figure out this percussion thing. I was made aware of what else could be out there from my time in drum corps. I was in the pit percussion section for Jersey Surf and the Crossmen. This was like the late 90s. So this, decent, Crossman especially was a pretty decent group at that time. My main interest at that point was kind of like chamber music. I really liked percussion ensemble, like quartet. Like I got exposed to that, I guess, at a moment when my interests and my energies were ripe, and all I just had to find was something I enjoyed and was mildly good at and felt like I could get better at. And so that was percussion ensemble. So that turned into me being part of, it's mostly in the rearview mirror now, but part of the Exit 9 Percussion Group, which we played together for about 20 years, between 400 and 500 shows we played.
People that don't know, the New Jersey Turnpike.
Yeah. That's the Rutgers exit. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's what you named the group, or you joined?
Girlfriend of one of the founding members named it. And we, as soon as we heard it, we're like, That's the name. That's what it is. No argument, no discussion. That's what we're called.
It's a little better than mystery meat, but
I think a chamber group called Mystery Meat could actually make some inroads in, build some bridges.
Yes, and you guys can play like Van Halen,
Van Halen. I think that band was like Bad Religion and like punk and stuff like that. That's what we did back then. And Red Hot Chili Peppers covers, stuff like that.
Yes.
Awful original songs.
Really?
Yeah.
I can't find a CD lying around of your band. You guys record anything?
All have been destroyed.
Damn. I'm gonna find it on the internet and be like,
this is the great thing about playing music in the early 90s, man. That don't exist.
Man. So Rutgers, did you get a master's degree? You said
I did unusually I did like a BA and a Bachelor of Music at Mason Gross School of the Arts there. And then I went to my professor there, was a very big influence in my life. Actually just met up with her a couple days ago just to catch up. Shi Wu is her name. Fantastic marimba player and just a powerhouse musician. And she had studied at the University of North Texas, and I had already known about that. A couple distinguished former guests of yours on this program, North Texas people, including a good friend of mine and of ours, Joe Horshesky, whom I went to high school with.
Oh, really?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, a little bit of trivia. And actually, I played with him last night for the second time since high school jazz band. Last night was Radio City, where I subbed on the timpani chair last night for yet another guest of yours, Josh Samuels. But Joe and I was his drumline captain in high school together. Yeah. Just a little bit of trivia for everybody. Joe's done quite well for himself. I take zero credit for that, but he had gone to North Texas. And I remember hearing about it. So that had planted the seed well before I had even decided to major in music in college. But my teacher, having gone there and heard about all the people that she studied with, I wanted to go there. I wanted to study with Ed Soph, wanted to study with Robert Shatroma, Christopher Dean, Mark Ford. These are all, within the kind of percussive academia world. They're all very well known, but also, especially Ed Soph, very well known beyond just the academic world and the classical kind of concert percussion world.
Did you know Sean McDaniel, or was he already?
I had heard of Sean. Sean came through before he was gone by the time I got there. I think by a year or two, and I was only there for grad school for 2 years.
Okay,
I think Sean had done. Sean and Joe had both done undergrad there, and I was there. I actually did a fellowship, so I was also like teaching lessons. I was teaching. If I was a little bit older, because of the way they do their lessons there, I may have been teaching Sean mallet lessons because they require all the jazz studies majors to still take a certain degree of mallet lessons just to establish proficiency, base level proficiency on everything.
I didn't go to college for music. I went and studied business, and I was always in the marching band, and I never got a chance to actually study percussion. Mm-hmm. And the one time I had to actually use mallets was when I was subbing for Jared Schoenig at the Second Color Purple. And there was a marimba part. There was only 5 notes. And I was sweating bullets every time that part would come up. Because, you're playing in a pit. Sometimes you have the choreography. You have to play the drum set. Sometimes you have to play this over here and that over there. But the marimba part was to the right. So I put my stick down and played. Ding, 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 ding. I was like, oh, my God, I just got to memorize this because I don't know where it is. And it's just, being proficient at something. It takes a long time to learn certain instruments and do them well. And I admire people that play instruments that require, musical notation or notes, because People probably admire drum set players. Like, how do you get all four limbs going at the same time?
Yeah.
And
people say the same thing about four mallet playing. Like, how do you get them all? Well, it's the same. Everything has, first of all, if you're curious enough about it, you'll spend the time to figure it out. And second of all, everything's got steps. And you take your first step, and then when you're ready, you take your second step, and everything, some people go through those steps quicker, but everything is, just a matter of progression. But that's interesting. You use the word choreography, like every percussion book that I've played or combined book, drum percussion book, there is the choreography that has to be planned, practiced, and internalized in order for you to feel comfortable, because there's that panic. I'm sure you've experienced this, even with just like a stick to brush change, where you're not sure which hand is going first, which side are you stashing the things on? Are you hanging the brushes? Are they on a tray? Are they on the kick drum? Wherever, like, you need to have a plan, and all that air traffic needs to be mapped out so that you know what's going around. And I remember a huge memory, and I think about this all the time. When I was going in to sub for Josh Samuels at Beetlejuice, a week before, he had me in because he wanted to just check to see, he wanted to see me play a couple of things. Very, very reasonable. And another former guest of yours, Josh Priest, was covering Shannon's leave of absence at the time. So Josh came in, like, they just wanted to hear me for like 5-10 minutes. And they picked a couple numbers out of Beetlejuice and it said, "Oh, I just want to hear you play this and this." So, fine. And it was weird. Like I'm used to playing along with the conductor cam or recording something like that. But I'm like, all right, I know the music well enough. I can fill in the blanks in my mind. And so we played through it, and I'm like, it's a week before my first show, something like that. I hit a couple wrong notes and this timing wasn't quite right. I'm like, well, I got another week. I know I can fix this, but I don't know what they're going to think about that little misgiving or mistake. And so I stopped and I played through and because I think this is the first time, like, Josh and I had been friends for a while, but I think he had never heard me play like a percussion book. He actually subbed for me on Yiddish Fiddler for a minute. But that's a very different animal from Beetlejuice in terms of like the intricacy and the choreography. But I'll get to make a long story slightly longer. The comment he said to me right after I played, I'll never forget this, because I was waiting for some kind of like minute correction. This needs to be there. And no, he just said to me, he's like, "Your movement looks good." Because it's a 360-degree environment, multiple vertical levels, foot pedals, all this stuff, and you have to reach across the room and play a triangle roll with your left hand while you're playing this, while you're tuning timpani with your foot. Like, it's heavily. That's a crazy book. Like, I would love to put Josh or anybody in an MRI while they're playing that book just to see what's going on in their brain. But he just said, "No, your movement looks good." In other words, he saw that my weight was shifting in the right direction. He saw that my arm was reaching for this thing. And the right note, yes, the right note will happen. The right rhythm will be tweaked, but you know where you're going. And so that flustered nature that can sometimes happen if you don't know what you're doing wasn't present. And so I felt like that was like a good sign. I was able to demonstrate, like, I knew the dance of the book. I learned the dance.
Speaking of getting your movement right and progress,
yeah,
you left University of North Texas and you decided to move back to the Northeast.
Yes.
Why not LA or Nashville or San Francisco?
I knew what I was getting back into. I knew I could at least that percussion group it just so happened that the person who took my place in the Exit 9 percussion group, actually, have you talked to Grant Braddock?
Not yet. He's
okay.
Working on that.
Okay. So Grant and I basically switched places. He took my place in Exit 9 for a couple years. And then when I came back out, he was like, I think moving to South Africa for a minute or something. Like you'll have to talk to him to get clarity on what but he had a very interesting, set of projects going on from what I remember. But I knew at least I was going to have, like I mentioned, 400 to 500 shows. That was like in the heyday of that. And so I knew I would have some work coming back up to New Jersey. And I knew I could also get a lot of work as a dance accompanist, which has been a big part of what I do. At the time, it was at Rutgers, and later it moved into some of the conservatories and professional training programs in New York City. But that was a bed of work that I could rely on right out of grad school. I didn't have necessarily any theater, actually not even necessarily. I don't even need to qualify that. I had no theater plans at that point. It was not on my radar yet. And that didn't happen until 5 years later. So I got I kind of mentioned this in a little bit of our earlier correspondence, but I got kind of a late start into the Broadway and musical theater world, compared to the people I see now who know that's, much earlier on, know that that's what they want to focus in. I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if that was a bad thing. I feel like I have something to refer back to, a set of experiences that's not just this kind of more musically, to be honest, musically limiting experience that can be musical theater, right? It's not expressive in the way that we ultimately are capable of being as fully creative artists. We have to channel our creativity within these lanes. Make it fit the story, make it fit the orchestration, make it fit, if the ink is vague, how vague is it, how much latitude do I have? I had a lot of other musical experience with the dance class, with the chamber group, and we did a lot of outreach. A lot of those 400 to 500 concerts were outreach. We did, we went to Asia a couple times, went to the West Coast, up and down the East Coast a little bit. But there was a lot of outreach, which implies also just a lot of different genres. So another guy that was in that group, who you may or may not have spoken to already, is Mike Ramsey. He's maybe one of the humblest people I've ever met, and he's a fantastic musician. He's been subbing at Lion King for, I don't know, maybe 20 years.
Wow.
Something like that. But he's also he's subbed a bunch of other, but I know he's subbing MJ now. And I know this is not a show about the other people I've met, but these are the people I think of when I think of I'll tell you, be specific. Mike and Grant are the people that I think of when I go successful, humble, and have a really good underpinning of musicianship that will translate well into whatever shows they play. And that, in terms of, I never really had teachers that were into theater, but I did have colleagues who were really into it. And I feel like those are a couple people, and a lot of the people that you've already had on the show that I've been fortunate enough to become acquainted with, and in some cases friends with. Those are the people who kind of helped steer me in this direction. Because I felt like I possessed this skill set and I wasn't sure what to do with it. I had a lot, like I said earlier, I had a lot of different interests, and the one place where those could come to bear, but whether it's the different musical styles or working with dance, being able to play for choreography, be able to read dance the way you read musical notation, and be able to know where you need to add energy to fuel the dancers. and not just to hit, hit a crash when they put their hands up, something like that. That's also important, but other things to actually get inside the movement. But all those experiences turned into something that was appropriate for musical theater. I had a lot of different interests, and no one particular show ever touches all of them, but some of them, sometimes, it emphasizes that there's a little bit more of a groove, and sometimes there's a little bit more of the expressiveness of, like being able to play really, really dialed in timpani playing to help, orchestral swells within a more expressive moment of the music. Like those sorts of things. It's like it's hitting all these different experiences that I've had before that I don't know. It's nice to have a nice full toolbox that I didn't know I was building at the time that makes it helpful for me now, for whatever shows I'm playing.
Well, I guess that toolbox was filled with tools from the years when you were doing things like the Bay Atlantic Symphony, the Brooklyn Metro Chamber, and the Hudson Valley Philharmonic.
No.
And
did you research?
No, I just knew this off the top of my head. I could just tell you did these things. and you went from doing those kind of gigs to what you're doing now. Why are you still doing that kind of thing, or did you just leave that behind in order to focus on more musical theater and working with dancers?
Absolutely, I'm still doing it. I have a New Year's Eve gig with Bay Atlantic. I'm playing principal there. They do a New Year's Eve concert every year, and most often I'm on that job. Hudson Valley's not doing so well. That's a fantastic orchestra up there. They rehearse in Poughkeepsie, in that neighborhood. I still play with as many different groups as I possibly can. I think because, I think everybody just wants to stay sharp. And if you get into too much of an environment where you know exactly what's going to happen all the time and you're doing the same thing, that can get dangerous. It's the concept. I'm sure you've heard this, maybe, some of the previous guests have touched on this also, but the idea of show chops is that I can play this show really, really well and kind of nothing else. And that terrifies me. I want to make sure that I keep the rust off of my playing as much as possible. I mean, you can't remove all the rust from all of the aspects. The wider the turf is that you're trying to cover, stylistically, the harder it is to do that. But a couple days ago, I did a Christmas program with Princeton Pro Music. It was all choir. It was this orchestra and huge concert choir. Where one of these, like, you get one rehearsal and they just throw a score at you and you say, figure out what percussion instruments you're playing with this other guy. And we had to coordinate, like, looking at each other during the rehearsal, going, "Are you playing that triangle note? Am I playing that cymbal note?" Like, go. Like, you can't be slow in that circumstance. And that element of not being quite comfortable it's a good idea I think, to experience that on a somewhat regular basis. I'm playing dance classes with, there's a gentleman who teaches technique class, Horton dance technique class for the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, who I accompany sometimes. He scares the heck. He's great. His name is Milton Myers. He scares the heck out of me because he's so intense. And I'll accompany his dance classes at Juilliard, which is yet again like another intense kind of, quasi intimidating building to be in, because like there's members of the New York Philharmonic walking through the hallway and like peering into the room when I'm playing djembe in there. And it's like, they're listening. I know. Because I've gotten text messages from friends of mine who were students at the time that he would go back and report on my playing. to the percussion students who just happened to be on the same floor as the dance students in the building. It had nothing, like there was no other reason for him to be coming across me. So there's this environment where, like, whether I'm playing for Milton Myers or I'm playing in a circumstance where I wish I had just gotten that second rehearsal, it's like that feeling of like, is this prepared? Like you can do your homework, but you're not entirely sure because you haven't done the whole thing yet. And the cool thing about musical theater is also the bad thing about musical theater in terms of the number of reps you get. If you're a sit down in a theater for a while, maybe you're doing a regional production, or you get an off-Broadway show or Broadway show, and you get the onset of show chops. And sometimes I can only speak for myself. I've found that if I'm not careful, I can get a false confidence out of that doesn't translate to actually being able to produce well for whatever my next gig is going to be, because every job ends. And so you have to be keeping yourself sharp for whatever the next job is. I feel relatively confident that my brain has been used for more than just playing one show at a time. And so I'll be able to like get up to speed fairly quickly for the next thing, because I've never just like sat back and going, I'm just going to play my one show. Josh Samuels, he and I are friends and colleagues, and he gave me a great piece of advice, which I feel is like, he and I have, we've traded professional advice to each other, and this was a great one for me, is hustle when you have work, not when you don't have it. And I thought a lot about that. And first of all, that in part explains a lot of people's success, including his. But it's that, trying to figure out what's next, because, things aren't going to last forever. But also, you think about this, when you have a lot of work, you have a different energy about you, right? Like, hey, this is good. Like, I got a lot of stuff going on. You got a lot of stuff going on. Let's make something happen, not right now, but eventually, as opposed to, hey man, I don't got anything going on. Like it's like, no, you're still the same person. And what, whereas one person is maybe even more available and more rested, is like, let's say you're going to be like, want to become a sub. The other person is sharp, right? And it becomes a little bit more of an even, this is my perception of it. It becomes a little bit more of an even playing field, because you're like, I can help you out. You can help me out. It's a mutual thing, as opposed to what ends up happening sometimes is that, and I've fallen victim to this to myself as a sub, is forgetting that it's not just them on the mountaintop handing down this work to you. It's that you're also being of service to them so that they can do other things. That's one of the reasons you and I first talked, as a matter of fact. I remember because there's something around Father's Day when you were covering Avenue Q. You were doing the leave of absence, and I was just one of the subs on Joe's roster, and I happened to be available for you. I'm assuming that was a reason why you decided, like, hey, let's talk some other time as well. Like that I was of some use to you, right?
Yes.
Happy to be so, absolutely happy to be it, and happy to have the work. And I loved playing that show. But it's that hustle when you have work thing that helps you remember, for lack of a better expression, to remember your dignity. Because sometimes people, like in the interest of getting work, they will kind of shelve their dignity, and that doesn't necessarily bring you up in the minds of other people. Because if they don't have work for you, it doesn't matter how you present yourself. They don't have work for you. It's how they remember you then is what matters.
you've talked about, and I'd just like to ask you about the intersection of your playing and muscular dystrophy. Tell me more about that.
So I have a form of muscular dystrophy called Charcot-Marie-Tooth type 2A. And I was diagnosed when I was 5 years old, something like that. And there are a lot of different types. I think there are like 50 or 60. That's probably an out-of-date number, but there are a lot of different types of muscular dystrophy. Mine affects probably the least convenient muscles for drummers and percussionists to be affected: my hands and my feet. Oh. So it's a progressive condition that I like, meaning my hands used to be stronger than they are now. Now, one of the reasons I like to keep busy is because that holds my strength, right? The more I play, it literally, no hyperbole, no need to like adapt this in any way. It's a use it or lose it type of thing. The more I play, the more I'll be able to continue to play. That for me has been a motivating factor because I feel like I can't wait as much. And yes, I can be practicing, but I also like to be engaged in a professional, just for like paying my mortgage, like that sort of thing. Like I need to be able to be active, and I'd like it to coincide with continuing the use of my muscles. So I have it's the intrinsic muscles in my hands are let's say less cooperative. And so all that means for me is that I have to find smarter ways to do certain things. I do have certain speed limits, I'm not the aforementioned Vinnie Paul. I'm not going to be matching him, he's no longer with us, but that playing, that style of thing, or like, the craziest marimba players, like that sort of stuff. Like I don't have, muscle wise, like the potential's not quite as high. I can work towards things and get, build up my speed and whatnot. But where, and this is one of the cool things about theater, is like, when's the last time like anything in theater was physically taxing? Like how often does that come across? And for that matter, a lot of types of music, like how often are you really physically taxed? And it's much more about your sound concept, your concept of the music. I would say the most physically taxing music I play is when I'm playing with a samba group, and you have to play it batucada for 20 minutes without stopping. Wow. Right? That's, there's a couple people that hire me to go play, like be in a samba percussion section for parties and stuff like that. That's, like probably the most demanding stuff. We're playing like club dates at a wedding, where you're doing like, 4 1-hour sets over the course of an evening or something like that. Those are the most, closest to the physically demanding, but it's still not fast. It's more like just play smart and you'll be able to last. It's the same as anybody. But I will tell you, there have been moments. One of them happened at Beetlejuice, actually, where I really had to outthink my condition. There's timpani parts. So the timpani parts in that show, very, very active tuning with your feet. That's me using my feet. And there, because of the orthotics that I have to wear, I literally, my ankle is stuck at a 90-degree angle. So as you might imagine, tuning timpani becomes a little bit more of a physical challenge. And there was one day, there's this moment in like the opening number, I was practicing it on the drums at the theater, and I'm like, oh no, like, I don't know if I'll be able to do this. And it just had to do with like, it was like you go D-A-C-G, D-A-C-G. Like you had to do that a couple times, and it was like just the mechanics of it were really, really hard. And I was like, I had been working on that. Everything else was good, but this was like one of the remaining itchy spots that wasn't like, I just couldn't scratch that itch right there. And I remember literally I'm having this like mild crisis in the pit. This was when it was over at the Winter Garden. And I remember like one of the other subs like was coming into practice after me. And Jessie Linden, I don't know if you've spoken with her. Great player. This was like the only time I'd ever met her. And I remember I was having this moment where I'm like, God, I don't know if I can play the show, because like literally it was a physical limitation. And this moment in the timpani was really high in the mix in that part of the show. And I'm having this moment and I hear a knock on the door that it was her turn to come into practice. And I'm like, I remember like thinking like, okay, make a good first impression. But like in my mind, I'm like, well, I may have found my limitation. I may have found the moment where like I actually can't do the thing. And so I was like, wait a second. No. Don't quit. Like, because I do a lot of teaching, and I never would have let a student give up on that. So I'm like, all right, put your teacher hat on and teach yourself how to do this. And what I realized in that particular moment, and it ended up becoming a joke, is like, all right, in order to do this, the issue is actually this specific, like resetting the drums on this side. And I realized if all I could do is just like stomp my foot with my heel, which you're not supposed to do with timpani, you don't tune them with your heel, you tune them with your toe, right? If all I had to do is like stomp on the drum, on the pedal with my heel, then I would be able to do this thing. It's still like really crazy because I have to use my whole leg, and it's very ungraceful. It gets the job done. But if I were able to do that, I could play this part accurately. And in order to do that, I went home and I got kitchen towels and I rolled them up, and I went into the theater and like I stuck it underneath the toe of the pedal and I pushed it all the way sharp. And I was like, all right, it's still not in the right place. So I folded over the towel and I put it again. All right, getting closer. And I realized if I fold this towel 4 times over, I will be able to just stomp on this thing with my heel, get the notes like on both. And I remember every time I went to the drums, I had to use a different number of folds. Like when I would go and set up do my whole pre-show ritual. But like, as long as I could have these kitchen towels here, I would be able to play this little segment. And that was, and it turned into a joke because every once in a while I'd forget to take them away, and Josh would be like, why the hell are there kitchen towels under the timpani pedals? And then I explained to him, and he was like, oh, okay. He was totally cool, but it was like random. You know, people you walk into your setup and you want everything to just be the way it's supposed to be. And you're like, someone doing laundry? Like, what's going on? But that turned into like, it basically reaffirmed like, there's a way to do anything. And you have to throw out what you think the right way is supposed to do and just get the job done. And especially the cool thing about theater percussion is because you're not being seen, you don't have to worry about like your presentation quite as much. It can be quite ungraceful and you just get the job done. And music director is none the wiser. They have no idea that you're, bringing kitchen linen into the pit to get stuff done. But all kinds of things like that, like little problem solving skills that have translated into just part of the extended technique of being a percussionist, multi-percussionist, theater percussionist, that sort of thing, where the people doing the orchestrations don't care about how you have to do it anyway. So why do I have to care how I do it? I just have to do it. Nugget. But, yeah.
Tell everybody about what you have to do being the in-house contractor, and what does it mean being a shop steward?
In-house contractor and shop steward. So one is administrative and the other one is more of a labor oriented, like union adjacent position. In-house contractor is, I affectionately think of myself as the homeroom teacher for the orchestra. The main jobs are just to do payroll and to make sure that everybody is in their seats by the time the show's ready to start. And, both for the Act 1 as well as Act 2. Actually, I got some emails last night because although I had subbed out last night, I'm getting issues. There's that show runs long, and so getting in your seats for Act 2 is actually pretty crucial. And so I've been tasked with helping to make sure that goes through properly. That goes through in a timely fashion. But being an in-house, I enjoy it because I like talking to people. And it's not just talking to percussionists at that point. You're talking to every chairholder and every sub for every chairholder on some level. But the in-house job is it's kind of like HR, a little bit of that. I work on an off-Broadway show, so. Broadway, this is one of the differences between Broadway and off-Broadway, is the definition of this role is a lot looser off-Broadway than it is on Broadway. And on Broadway, it's much more strictly what I was talking about. It's payroll and butts and seats. Off-Broadway, because our show doesn't have a contractor in the traditional sense, so a lot of the things that a contractor would be asked to do, I'm asked to do. I'm in touch with stage management a lot more. I'm in touch with production management, company management, because I'm a conduit to the orchestra, and I have the infrastructure set up to communicate certain things to them. It's just the most efficient way to get word out. And that dovetails nicely with the union steward thing, which is, and this is something I believe the impression I'm under is that every orchestra selects who's going to represent them. And I was essentially selected back during our original run back in fall 2018, especially because there was some contract renegotiation that needed to happen. Every time our show got extended, it was a success, but then that meant new contract, new pay rates, new terms, new everything. And so there was a lot of phone calls, a lot of business that needed to be attended to, where the union who does the actual negotiation for the musicians needs to be aware of what the musicians need. And that contact person who helps that awareness and that two-way communication happen is the shop steward. Very commonly, it's the same person as the in-house because of that. Again, they have these existing pathways of information and relationships, and so it doesn't have to be, but it tends to be. That's my understanding. Now, what I was saying about in-house is, like, again, that's been my experience off Broadway. I don't want to make it seem like that's always the way it is for everybody else, because I don't think it is. And people often refer to off Broadway as like the Wild West. Like, so this is one distinction. It's helpful to understand. There is no off Broadway standard contract. There is for Broadway. There is what are called commercial off Broadway area standards. And it's basically like a template that contracts can be based on. So that's why you got a lot of variety. Like, we're getting into the business weeds of New York theater, but like, there's a lot of variety with off Broadway in terms of like the work, compensation, premiums, all that. Not as much the premiums, but like just the rates, like all the pay stuff is not nearly as consistent as it is on Broadway. And there's articles, if you want to link to them, in the recent issue. I wrote an article in the recent issue of Allegro that you can share, and also the International Musician, the national, I guess it's international publication. I'm not sure the distribution of that magazine, but they're also doing a separate article. It's not the same article. It's actually a different article about Yiddish fiddlers contract negotiation and our union organizing efforts around this particular contract. And it has to do with how loose off-Broadway can and often is.
So tell me about this switchboard percussion accessory table. What exactly is that?
So this is something that was born out of just the need. We talked about earlier, we talked about dignity, and that was with respect to, like what you're willing to, how you present yourself to other people in the, arranging the work, whether you're willing to sub, how available you are, whether you're willing to work for this amount of pay or that amount of pay. So that's like professional dignity. And then there's like the presentation dignity. And I had always been bothered by the whole music stand with a towel draped on it thing. I felt like, yes, it's useful for percussionists. We just need to have a quiet surface to put something down on. But I also felt like it wasn't a good use of space. So that the switchboard was something I worked on, and it's actually patented now. It's something I worked on where I wanted to make better use of the space with the idea that it would be to have a better application for musical theater, definitely for musical theater circumstances. And the main thing with that is the ability to better harness vertical space. So like the way that the table is designed, it's about the same size as a music stand, but there are adjustable elements to it so that you can hang things off of it, remove them. It's something I should have one next to me here so I could just start pointing at things. But it's basically specifically designed with musical theater in mind, because we often have to have a lot of weapons and we don't have a lot of space to store them, right? We have to have a lot of different sticks, a lot of different mallets, let alone your in-ears and your beverage of choice that you need to keep, within hand's reach. And it was just basically a way where I thought, like, I have this handy side of me. I like building things. I like woodworking, that sort of stuff. Let me see what I can do. And actually, Billy Miller ended up helping me a lot with some of the concepts, like materials providers, and just like talking through some of the ideas. It's something I have. The Juilliard Percussion Studio wants to order some from me. Josh has been using one at Beetlejuice for a few years. Everybody who sees it, and you can put some pictures up if you like. Everybody who sees it goes like, oh, that I see exactly why that thing would earn its keep in a multi-percussion setup. When most of the time, one of the biggest limitations in a musical theater circumstance is space. You don't have quite as much of it as you'd like. And so the idea was just very simply be smarter with space. And that's an operating principle with that. And it was fun to design because I got to use this other problem solving part of my brain that I talked about a little bit earlier with respect to my physical limitations. But this was also something where, like, it makes certain, like, retrieving and stashing certain things easier for me because of my limitations, but makes it easier for everybody, which makes them quicker, more accurate, just quieter. All those things that you need to be if you have to have a lot of different things being interchanged within a performance.
There are certain things that are ubiquitous in a Broadway pit or off-Broadway pit. One of those is the Miller machine. What should be next is the switchboard percussion accessory table.
That is ultimately the goal. As a matter of fact, the Switchboard was on Broadway before I was. It got its first show before I did. But yeah, and actually, Billy, this was actually a funny story. Billy and I were on the phone because I had actually taken my Miller machine and altered it, like literally cut into the aluminum in such a way so that it would be mountable to my switchboard. And so when I use it, like you can find pictures of my fiddler setup, my old fiddler setup when we were at stage 42, where you could just see the Miller machine. I didn't have to have a separate clamp for it. It was just mounted right to the switchboard. And Billy was like, actually, and we had like this phone conversation, like, do I want to start selling Miller machines with that alteration on? Like he entertained that for a second. And then he's like, actually, I got a better idea. And he literally on a napkin drew out a design for how to make a Miller machine adapter for the switchboard. And he took a picture of, so I actually have a picture of this napkin sketch that Billy made for me. And so I made it. And it's a matter of going into production. That is, the switchboard itself is something that if people are interested in, they can go to the website Gig with Switchboard. You can see pictures of it. And if you're interested, you can get on a mailing list so that as availability starts to ramp up, that can become something that will be available for sale. But the Miller machine adapter is on that. It's in the production queue somewhere. It's behind the main table, though. But that's been. What ends up happening, like, if you enjoy what you do and you're somewhat good at it, at least, you end up thinking about it a lot, even when you don't have to be thinking about it. And for me, that took the shape of me spending more than one all-nighter, like up like a mad scientist in my studio, trying to figure out how different things would, how, for example, it can like get mounted to the side of a xylophone without any drilling or adhesive or anything like that. And so if you imagine in a pit where like you have mic stands and things that need to go on the floor, that floor space is precious, and you don't want to have legs, what I call is hardware spaghetti, where all the legs are kind of like tangled with each other. And I figured, okay, what would be nice? Be able to mount it in that way. And so I designed, that's an element of the design. We're getting into like really super percussion specific, but this Broadway drumming, Broadway percussion.
Well, Mr. Saleh, I got to wrap up this conversation. Peter is the author of A Percussionist Handbook. You are the drummer for the Yiddish language version of Fiddler on the Roof. You are a percussionist that has done many different things and is also one of the subs at Radio City. You are the in-house contractor, shop steward. You are author of several different articles for local 802's Allegro magazine and international musician.
I have to say it, like, the people that you have on this show are, to my mind, like just the people who have accomplished a lot of things. They have longevity, they musicianship, great interpersonal presence, like just good people in general, good musicians, good business people, artists, of all different things. So just to, for you to bring me in, I'm just honored to be like just having that association. So thank you for bringing me in and for giving me an opportunity to, talk a little bit about my little experience within this world.
Well, I'm glad you can be a part of it. I really enjoy your wisdom and your thought process and just everything that you brought to the table. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Clayton.
All right, we will talk soon, and hopefully I'll see you on the Broadway campus. If not on the Broadway campus, then on the cart of the Radio City Christmas Spectacular.
Sounds good.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Clayton.
Thanks.
Take care, man. Bye-bye.
Thank you again for joining us. If you'd like what you heard, subscribe to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please take a moment to give us a nice rating and review. Stay tuned for more.